Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today on Jay Slay, Made in the USA, where we explore truth, expose deception, and inspire courage. And today's topic, it takes courage. It takes courage to talk about this because whether you're talking about the deep, high-level left wing or the deep, high-level right wing, both of them do not want us discussing this matter. So neither side has the market actually cornered on this issue, even though that they think they do in terms of support for Israel. And, you know, I could go on about that, but I don't want to give away too much. You know, last time I had Joshua on the show, we talked about this, what we called a problem, and it was the Jewish infiltration of American policy, our overwhelming support for the nation state of Israel. You know, we've given almost $300 billion to that nation, more than any other nation since our founding in terms of our giving to another country. And if you want to explore that more, the foundation that we laid of the problems that we see, you can click the link that's in the description on episode 1. We lay that out. We both, especially Joshua, gives his own testimony, and that we're good-hearted people. We're wanting to get to the truth, but when you're exploring these layers and you're peeling them back, and then you see something. I came to this whole realization kicking and screaming. I did not want to discover what I discovered. And then when I did, it's kind of like you can't unsee it. So again, for those of you that want to understand more about this in terms of what are the problems, look at that first episode. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and bring on my good friend and researcher on this topic. Joshua, thanks for joining me once again.
Thank you for having me again. This is the second time in 1 week, and Jeremy and I have been in contact offline talking about several subjects. And what can I say? I'm just very fortunate to be here. I appreciate you, Jeremy. As you said in your intro, speaking about these subjects has become, frankly, the most controversial, the most hot button kind of thing that you can do. Just speaking words. This day and age, sadly, that's the state of affairs. And so we're trying to go out and live by example, have the courage to simply have these conversations that are very sensitive, but we understand that the criticality of these particular conversations around religion and around the ethnic fabric of our country, that these things actually matter and relate to our national identity and our future success, and whether or not God even approves of how our country is functioning. All of this stuff is deeply important to us as Christians. So I thank everybody who watches tonight. Thank you, Jeremy, for having me back to elaborate more on these subjects. I appreciate all the research and work you do, because I know this is a full-time job, and I know that you're treating this as a full-time job, which is something that I really commend, because it takes a lot of courage, which seems to be in short supply these days.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about that. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. Let's dive right in. So I know I said we're not going to talk about problems. I do want to establish one question before we talk about solutions, because this live stream tonight, I want us to get into what's the solutions to the problem. But many who have not seen episode 1 will say, hey, okay, so maybe there is a lot of so-called Jewish infiltration into media, into American policy and our government, into business in America. So what? Aren't we a Judeo-Christian nation? Don't we have Judeo-Christian values? So why should this matter? It's a lot better than having some other religion involved. What say you?
Yes, this is the conversation, part of it that we had during the very long 2-hour conversation earlier this week. This question came up because it is the immediate rebuttal that we get whenever we try to speak about our Christian priorities and looking at the leadership class of the United States. And when we refer to the leadership class, I like to summarize it by 4 civil institutions that really determine how our whole country thinks, our careers, how we get educated, how we use our money, how our economy is driven, what we hear when we turn on the news or the radio, or what we read in the newspaper. It's very important that these civil institutions, which all 4 are the government, the media, banking, and education, it's very important that we as Christians recognize, in an ideal world, obviously these institutions will be led by people who have Christian morals. And I can make this very easy to understand just using an example and saying, would you like it if we had Islamic leadership determining what marriage looks like in this country, where in the Islam world, you're allowed to have up to 4 wives? Well, do we as Christian Americans think that that's a good idea? Obviously not. In the Islamic nations, according to their religion and how they like to run their countries, the punishment in some of them for theft is cutting people's hands off. And the punishment for homosexuality is throwing them off of a roof. So, these are very real, tangible differences between the religion that the leadership class hold being pushed on the rest of the population to fall in line with it in its preferences. So obviously, as Christians, if we woke up one day in America and noticed that 40, 50% of our government were Muslims, or 40 to 50% of the people running the media, and thus getting to determine what morality is confirmed or rejected in the media or in the newspapers and so on, we would have a significant problem with this. If they were trying to push Sharia law through the education system, through the media, and through the government, and they were using the economy to manipulate these things with a preference towards Sharia law, I think we can all confidently agree that we as Christians would say, this can't go on. We can't tolerate this. Yeah. This is an egregious offense to God to promote any kind of religion that says Jesus Christ is not God, Jesus Christ didn't die on the cross, wasn't resurrected. Say what you will about Islam. I have Muslim friends, and they understand that America is not a Muslim country. And so they kind of understand why us Christians feel so passionate about keeping it a Christian country. So I use this example because it turns out it's not Muslim people who are 40 to 50% of our government or overwhelmingly running the entertainment industry. And that's true about film production, television production, the recording labels, the talent agencies. It's not Muslim people who dominate the finance industry. And it's not Muslim people who are currently 6 out of the 8 Ivy League presidents in the most elite institutions of our country that fill in all of the job placements and the governmental placements in our federal government and state governments. It's Jewish people. And whether that's religious Jews, Zionists, or even Orthodox Jews, not so many of the Orthodox Jews, it's mostly Zionist Jews who are on the right side, or it's secular, leftist, liberal Jews who are occupying these roles in government. And this is a fundamental problem for a Christian country. We can't allow a religious group of people who derive their morality from somewhere that is not the Holy Bible, that is not the New Testament, to determine how our laws look in this society and how they're enforced, and to determine what education curriculum gets taught to our children, and to determine how the media portrays Christians ourselves. I mean, when you watch Hollywood and you watch mainstream television, Christians aren't necessarily portrayed in the most positive light. We're kind of seen as the wet blanket and the old guard who just need to kind of embrace the times and relax a little and embrace homosexuality, embrace transgenderism. Let's start calling killing your child abortion. Let's just start calling that women's health care. Well, it turns out the leadership class is dominated by Jews across all these civil institutions. And the question that Jeremy asked to prompt me to go into this was, what difference does it make? This is the difference. You have an entirely different moral compass guiding all of the most important civil institutions in our country. And so this is a call to arms, not literally speaking. As Christians, we're nonviolent. We don't recommend taking any kind of violent arms to fix this problem. But the whole point of having this second follow-up session tonight is to go into some of the practical things we can do about what do we do now? Like, if I actually do look at the receipts, and Jeremy was showing them on the screen, he can show you the Biden administration being dominated by Jews. He can pull up all of the film studios and show you how they're dominated by Jews.
One thing, Joshua, that I'm going to do on that, when you get done talking, because I didn't want to interrupt. I think it's important that people see your expressions, and I didn't want to cover you up. When you're done, I am going to run through some of these little slides, which are accurate, like very accurate, and I think we can respond to each of them. But yeah, go on. I just wanted you to know I'm going to go back to those, and we can talk about them.
Yeah, I appreciate that too, because I don't want anybody to watch this and think that this guy just has an animosity against Jews. He just opened his mouth and suddenly started putting the blame on all of our cultural ills, the abortion, the homosexual parades, transgenderism, feminism, this push for socialism. Where is all of this coming from? I mean, if you're a conservative Christian American, you need to understand that these things are coming from the higher education system. They're coming from the government telling you that you have to treat transgender people this way. You have to look at homosexuality this way. You have to affirm homosexual marriages. And you have to consider abortion a fundamental human right. And this is stuff coming from our government. It's not just education. And you know, whenever you watch Netflix, whenever you watch a Hollywood film, they all say the exact same thing as well.
Yeah.
That abortion is a sacred right, and homosexuality is not different whatsoever than heterosexuality. The outcomes are the same for society. That's not true. And that hasn't even been thought to be true for pretty much the entirety of human history up until maybe the last decade or two, where unfortunately we've backslid into a very hedonistic time where the courage it takes to just rebuke sin out in public has been so penalized that Christians have become kind of like beaten dogs into submission, where we're afraid to go out and put our career on the line, because that is actually what you're doing, or to put your reputation on the line for condemning these various things that only 30 years ago, any Christian in America would have said with full confidence, no, I don't condone that.
Yeah.
So,
Let me give one anecdote that really goes on with what you're saying, because people say, well, okay, federal level, yes, that's awful, but what can I do about it? Here in our local in Franklin, we had a recent mayoral race, and both Republicans. One was kind of this rhino type Republican. The other was one that was more like saying, I'm going to expose some serious stuff if I get elected. Now, ultimately, the lady that said I'm going to expose the serious stuff got blown away. The media went after up to a national level. I did an interview with her. It was put on HBO, and we were both called Nazis. Story for another day. But the Republican who won, who was the incumbent, he was asked in kind of a family meeting, we'll call it, in a very wealthy subdivision where he kind of did a town hall. And he was asked, what about the woke stuff that's creeping into the South and into Franklin? What are you going to do about this, that, or the other? And he said, well, you know, I went to Nashville and visited Rabbi Laurie Rice to get her thoughts on that whole issue about the BLM and abortion and other things. And all these Christians in the room, I've got video of it. They kind of got on their heels like, ooh, like, okay, he went to a Jewish rabbi like that. Okay, I guess that's kind of cool because God's chosen people. You could tell they just had no thought in their mind other than, what do we do with this? Well, I looked up Rabbi Laurie Rice, who is a Talmudic scholar, you know, also talks, you know, in glowing terms about the Torah, but specifically the Talmud, and says things on her personal blogs like, I could not imagine living in a world without abortion, things like that. And I'm thinking, this is a Southern mayor Republican who's going to a Nashville female rabbi about woke issues to figure out how to stand on it. And this rabbi is saying things like, I couldn't imagine living in a world without abortion. It's gross, but yet it's case in point. People don't know how to respond to it. They don't know the problem actually exists. And it takes bravery to actually speak out about it, and it's affecting us locally. So sorry, I wanted to give that personal anecdote.
Yeah, and you reminded me of something else that I need to clarify. When we get beyond the point of Jeremy's going to show you the receipts, and he already has a lot of them on screen, about the objective empirical fact, like you just measure the numbers. How many roles are there to occupy in the White House? How many of them are currently going to Jewish people? Do the same analysis in those other three civil institutions. Once you have actually looked at it and you can say, mathematically speaking, this is true, the next most important question is, what is the implication of this? Why is it any different than Christians running the society? Obviously, they're different religions, but the misconception that Christians have about their Judeo-Christian partners, as we call them, is that the only difference between us is the New Testament versus the Old Testament. This is kind of what the boomer generation and forward were indoctrinated to believe in public schools. Whenever you learn about other religions, even though most of our country was Christian over the last several generations, as we were being educated, we were told about the Jewish faith that it's really not that different. They adhere to the 10 Commandments, and they have this thing called the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. That's where they get their Levitical laws. Some of it's kind of silly. You know, you can't wear mixed fabrics. You can't eat this type of food and shellfish and all this other stuff. And that's all we were told about the differences between Christianity and Judaism. Mm-hmm. But this is a tragic underrepresentation of what modern day Judaism actually is. Modern day Judaism is not limited to the Torah and the laws of Moses, the 10 Commandments. Far more so, they derive their morality from a whole separate documented text called the Babylonian Talmud. And the difference between the Babylonian Talmud and the inspired words of God that are documented in the Old Testament is that the Talmud is written by the Pharisees, who claim to have received what they call the oral law. So while Moses was getting the 10 Commandments directly from God, this other group of Pharisees claim that they received a whole different set of instructions for how morality should work in the world and how Jewish people should interact with the rest of the world. Back then, you would have called them Israelite people. You wouldn't have called them Jews. Mm-hmm. But this wholly separate set of texts, the Babylonian Talmud, has been intentionally suppressed and kept as far away as possible from Christians for literally their entire life. I mean, most people watching, if you haven't watched Jeremy or myself before or somebody else in this field of commentary, then you probably haven't even heard of the Babylonian Talmud. I know I hadn't heard of it, despite growing up in the Bible Belt with my Judeo-Christian friends and even having Jewish family myself. I had never heard of the Talmud. Well, fast forward till I'm 35 years old a couple of years ago, and I'm trying to figure out what is different. Why? I did determine that Jewish people have far more influence in these civil institutions than anybody else. So, but what does that matter? That's the fundamental question. And so you have to ask, well, what do Jewish people believe? What is their culture? What have they carried with them generation over generation? And it's not limited to just the Judaic faith, because even in America, we have people who aren't practicing Christianity, but fundamentally they still follow Christian morality. Mm-hmm. They see marriage as a monogamous, heterosexual, lifelong bond, right? So in the same way that there's many, many international Jews out there who would say, well, listen, I'm ethnically Jewish, but you can't talk about Jewish culture because I don't participate in the Jewish religion. Well, their nation of Israel and their international voice still reflects very deeply the beliefs that are documented in the Talmud, such as the difference between Goyim and God's chosen people. They see themselves as ethnically God's chosen people, and everybody else is Goyim. And if you read the Talmud, it'll tell you that a Goyim is a subspecies of human being, meaning they're not bestowed universal human rights. They don't have the right to private property. If violent things happen to them, it's not as a severe situation as if something happens to a Jewish person. I would really highly advise people to go back and watch our previous episode, because that's where we got deep into the horrors of the Talmud. What it says about our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. It describes him as a blasphemer, a sorcerer, a necromancer who rightfully deserved to be murdered for speaking words, and that he is currently burning in hell in a pot of semen and excrement. That's what our Judeo-Christian partners have been carrying along as their description of God. Like, as a Christian, you have to think that means something. Yeah. If people who are running your society literally hate God, then how do you think God is going to favor your country? Do you think it's any mystery that when you look up and you find out that 40, 50% of the people in charge literally hate God and have rejected his morality, and you look around and everything around you has gotten worse? People aren't even having children. We have a negative birth rate. Our economy is in free fall. And ethnically speaking, the people who built this country are being replaced with people who don't adhere to Christianity. Most of them are coming from parts of the world where Christianity isn't a lifelong devotion. Mm-hmm. So all of this deracination of our nation is connected to the Jewish influence that is running our education, our banking, our media, and our government. And as Christians, we have to wake up and say, you can call me anti-Semitic, you can call me xenophobic, you can call me whatever you want. And I want to say, it's not Jews specifically. If this was any other world religion running a Christian country, which is America, we would have a problem with them too. That's why I started out with the example and the analogy of, if we woke up and realized people who are deeply invested in Islam were running our country, we would have a huge problem with that. So it's not any different when I have a huge problem with people who hate Jesus Christ running my country.
Yes, no, those are excellent points. There's so much to respond to. Let's start here. You know, I did put some things on the screen. I think you did a good job of talking about the Talmud. The next question somebody asks is, well, I've never heard of it. My pastor's never talked about it. It can't be that important. Again, I would direct them to our first episode, but I'll just say the Jewish Encyclopedia said it is the single most important written work that we have. They call it the religion of the rabbis, and they say it's carried their tradition from the Pharisees all the way to today and into the future. And that's from the Jewish Encyclopedia. It's also very expensive to try to get one of these things in English. You're looking at a couple $1,000s at least, but there is a copy of these. I've heard and I've read that in every single synagogue. I mean, I don't know if that's the case, but that's what I've read. So it's an important set of documents that they hold. But I want to go ahead and pull up, Joshua, these various slides and give you 2 or 3 minutes to kind of talk about each one. And I'll say, when it comes to LGBTQ issues, the woke stuff, that really opened my eyes, because I thought, well, Jews have nothing to do with that. Nothing. That's what I would have said a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. And then I began to explore, as I was looking at the attack on men and masculinity, I began to explore, okay, where did these modern day ideologies come from in the 1800s, 1900s, and the critical race theory? And almost every time at the bottom of that hole that I dug, I found someone with a Jewish ethnicity or ideology that was steeped in Talmudic or Kabbalistic traditions, and I couldn't look away. So I'm going to pull up a couple and just get your thoughts and responses. Tell me if you can see them. Here's the first one. Since we were talking about, feminism and LGBTQ issues, I mean, it's just loaded with people that say that they're Jewish. And you recently did an episode on Magnus Hirschfeld from that one on the right.
Yeah, I mean, I look at both of them, and you just take your pick. You can start with either one. If you want to talk about feminism, then I can tell you about Gloria Steinem, who was a obviously Jewish endorser of communism, and also CIA operative. So meaning our federal government and the Jews inside of it were colluding with communist groups to push feminism for the purpose of dividing the genders against each other in America. That's Gloria Steinem. You go look her up. She's the most recognizable name in women's rights, women's liberation. And then when you look at the transgenderism, you had Magnus Hirschfeld, who was the founder of the first clinic for transgender studies. And you mentioned that this stuff goes back to the Talmud. It's not just like some kooky coincidence that, okay, Jewish people, for whatever reason, they just are more open-minded about the gender roles, or are more open-minded about sexuality. Modern, they say this is like a slide of modernism or progressivism, that's how this happened. It's not progressivism and it's not modernism. You can go back to Weimar Germany only 80 years ago, where they're actually pushing these things. That's where Magnus Hirschfeld was. And if you go all the way back to the Talmud, then you find out that it also states that there are, I think it's either 6 or 8 different genders.
It's six genders is what I've seen.
Yeah, 6 genders. And also there's endorsements of pedophilia in the Talmud. And it's not fun to talk about these things. It's, somewhat awkward. But the truth of the matter is that because of their Goy versus God's chosen people 2-tiered society, they believe that sleeping with a child who is a Goy is not the same as sexually abusing a child who is a Jewish person. So that's the problems you run into when you say there's a certain set of human rights for us and a completely different set of human rights for other people. And then when you have the major epiphany of, wait a minute, these people run our country and they think that pedophilia is okay for some people, but not others, for themselves and not others. And then you remember, wait a minute, Jeffrey Epstein, that's a Jewish name. And then you remember the nature of Jeffrey Epstein's entire organization that was colluding with the federal government and completely in partnership with Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you have people like Microsoft, all the largest corporations in the world. The whole purpose of Epstein's blackmail organization is to bait influential American people and also foreign influencers into compromising situations, accumulate blackmail against them, so that they then have to go and do advocacy work for Jewish causes. That's how the Epstein ring, which, by the way, was tied directly to the Mossad, which is Israel's foreign intelligence agency, whose official motto is make war through deception. Yeah. Meaning these people have abrogated themselves from Christian morality. They said, hey, we're a different religion, we're a different culture, we're going to live by this. But the problem is you're living in our country. Christians built this country for Christians. So you have to adhere to our morality. It's not the other way around. We shouldn't be expected to bend and cater to Islamic traditions where you have the 4 marriages and you're throwing people off buildings and cutting off hands. And we shouldn't be expected to cater to Talmudic ideas, such as that there are 6 genders and that you can sleep with children and that you can openly blaspheme God. You know, these are things that as Christians should make us highly uncomfortable. But the most ironic thing is what makes us highly uncomfortable is rebuking these things, saying, I'm not Jewish. I don't believe what Jewish people believe. And that's like anti-Semitism. You're a Nazi. You're worse than Hitler. It's like, well, this is actually what I learned from the New Testament, is that I am called to go out into the world and rebuke sin and tell the truth and stand for the truth, no matter what the cost is to my reputation or my career or anything else.
Yes. Let's talk for a second, Joshua, about the you mentioned the power structures, because I want us to get through these slides and then get into the solutions, but I do think these are important. You know, there's 2 sides supposedly to our political spectrum here in America, and you got on the left, these weren't all appointed by Biden. Many of them were appointed before Biden, which that even further tells the tale. But on the left side, it says every single aspect of the Biden administration is Jewish. Many people don't know that, but that is true. You can fact check it. And even if it was 50% true, it would be a huge deal. But no, it's like 100% true. And then on the right, it says every single aspect of Trump's campaign funding is Jewish, which is really interesting, but also true. So speak on this for a minute, how both sides are sort of captured, and are they captured by separate versions of Jewish people?
Yeah, they are. On the right side, the conservative side, you have the neocons who are going to perpetually promote these wars in the Middle East, which very obviously benefit Israel. You know, the disarmament of Iran and preventing them from getting nukes and bombing the shit out of Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, everywhere else. Those things are good for Israel. They keep Israel protected, and they don't have the capacity economically or militarily to do that on their own. Israel as a nation could not exist if it weren't for the United States military providing them perpetual coverage and financial support through the $5+ billion they get every year. Jeremy mentioned at this point the tab for us American taxpayers handing our money over to Israel so that they can protect this honestly satanic faith that they have in this lie that they are ethnically owed that land. The tab for that is over $300 billion. That's, you know, more than $250 billion. And that's not also referring to the cost of human lives, not just Americans. I think it's over 100,000 have died in the wars in the Middle East, but also the millions of dead Middle Eastern people who were innocent over this aggressive expansionist state of Israel, where they want to accomplish what they call the Greater Israel Agenda, which is what you're seeing happening in real time, them plowing Gaza and taking over the West Bank. That's not the end of it. It's going to keep going. But the way they do this is by giving Americans the perception, the false illusion of choice. We think we're participating in a democracy when we get to make the choice between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. But the problem is Donald Trump is fully compromised as well. He received $100 million in 2016 for his first presidential campaign from Sheldon Adelson. And the Adelson family is a recurring decade over decade donator to the Republican Party. So the guy that we think is totally based, America First, patriot, he's going to go in and fix the border and whatnot. He's never going to do anything that compromises Israel. So it is true that he might do some things in the short term that are in the same interest as people like myself who would say, I'm America First. I'm a Christian nationalist. I want my nation to be devoted to serving Jesus Christ. He's going to do some things that help with that. But at the end of the day, he will never do anything that diminishes our relationship with Israel. And now on the left side, you have the secular liberal Jews, the people like the ADL run by Jonathan Greenblatt, who literally controls censorship, freedom of speech on the entire internet. And watchdog groups like the NAACP and the Southern Poverty Law Center, all of these things are founded and operated by Jews for for the specific intent of disallowing criticism of, they say, all ethnic groups. They don't want any hate speech towards anybody. But I'm sure you've noticed, if you're a white human being living in America for the last 10 years, that criticizing the white race is fair game. It's totally kosher. They produce Hollywood films about it. They write books that sell on the New York Times bestsellers list about it. You know, guys like Ben Shapiro, who runs Daily Wire, the most influential online conservative platform, he says, I don't give a damn about the browning of America. So these liberal institutions also put forth the anti-white, anti-Christ agenda. I mean, obviously, they're liberal in nature. Yeah. They promote abortion, and they promote the polyamory and the same-sex marriage, and they obviously promote feminism. So saying something as simple as women were meant to be supportive of their husbands and to create families. They're not meant to go out and be leaders in society, movers and shakers, CEOs, military commanders. To say something like that to these Jews, the ADL Jews on the left, that is like the most anti-American, misogynist, hateful, bigoted thing you can say. And the same thing with the abortion and the transgender and homosexual criticizing any of that. They say you are an awful, awful human being. So if you're on the right and you say, hey, I don't want us devoting all these resources to Israel, you're hated and called anti-Semitic. Yeah. If you criticize the left people and say, I don't want the homosexuality being pushed and the abortion and feminism and all that stuff, you're also called anti-Semitic, because the same people run both sides.
It's unbelievable. All right, I'm going to pull up the next one here. I'm not even sure which one this is, but it's okay. So on the left here, and these actually kind of go together in a weird way. On the left, and I didn't know this again until about a year ago, that most of the porn industry, whether you're talking about people at the top of the corporations or the founders of major corporate entities way back in the day, claim to be Jewish. And then on the right, you've got all this child grooming from Disney, which is incredibly Jewish. It's really, really weird. Tell me about this.
I'm so glad you brought this one up, because I took some notes before our session today, because you asked me, practically speaking, what do we even do? Like right now, this whole conversation so far has really been about establishing the receipts. You're showing people on screen. I'm elaborating on why it matters. And this is still just like getting us to the acknowledgement point. Once we get to that conversation of what do you do about it, I did write down one of the things, practically speaking, everybody watching this stream can go and do about this is disengage from the two institutions you're looking at. The Hollywood film engine, media engine, the Netflix shows, all the stuff that they put out, disengage from that. And even more importantly, and this is a tough one, and I know it's awkward for a lot of guys. At this point, a lot of women are involved as well and equally complicit. But the pornography industry has such a pernicious grip on Western civilization, and where we live, that's obviously here in America. I pulled some numbers before this because people need to hear it. So at this point, 58% of adults profess to be using pornography on a regular basis, and 42% of teenagers. So basically half of the population in our country are engaged in or complicit in prostitution. People are being paid to create this content. People are monetizing it. The advertisers, the owners who you see on screen, who own Pornhub, RedTube, the MindGeek empire, which is owned by a Jewish rabbi. These people, I want this to be really, really real. And I'm going to use some pretty vivid imagery here. And I apologize if it's tough to hear, but this is what is really happening. The owner of OnlyFans is also Jewish, because of course that would be the case. This guy went and donated $11 million just recently. You can go look up the headlines about this, to AIPAC or APAC, America-Israel Political Action Conference. The people who fund the politicians, they say, hey, I can give you $10 million to help you run your campaign and help you get that mayor position, that governor position, the presidency. But once you get that position, this is the Israel Political Action Committee. We need you to be pro-Israel when you're there. So when October 7th pops off, guess where they have to stand? And when the annual billions of dollars goes to Israel, guess where they have to stand? And when people start noticing these Jewish people are pushing pornography on our children, they're pushing feminism, they're pushing socialism, which is just communism. And every other social ill, when you start to notice and criticize that, well, the people that have been bought off, they get the leash yanked on them, and they get in many cases, the blackmail waved in front of them saying, hey, you remember the promise that you made. You need to go out there and say, oh, this rise in anti-Semitism is so worrisome. You guys know what happened last time there was a rise in anti-Semitism. The Holocaust happened.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody stop criticizing Jews. You can't have a problem with them running the porn industry, and you can't have a problem with them running Disney and perverting your children. And you can't have a problem with them pushing all these other problems in America because you might cause the next Holocaust. But on this pornography subject, 50% of America are now complicit in prostitution. How do you think God looks down on us? Think about Sodom and Gomorrah. What was the situation in Sodom and Gomorrah? Where God looked down and said he couldn't find 10 good men in the entire place. And so it was engulfed in flames, rightfully so. When people refuse to repent, then God has to reveal his judgmental side because sin has to have consequence. Sin can't go unchecked forever. So when you have a nation that is literally half of it, even the children are participating in prostitution and addicted to the sin of lust, I can't say with any confidence whatsoever God is looking down on America and thinking that he's going to bless this nation with the current state of affairs. Now, this is the connection that you have to take home, the very vivid one that I warned you about. This OnlyFans owner, I wrote down his name, Leonid Ravinsky, who donated $11 million to IPAC. This man convinces your daughter to take her panties off for $5 donations from strangers. Simultaneously, he introduces and addicts your sons to pornography. And then he takes his ill-gotten gains from this transaction of perverting both of your children, and he gives it to the people who are committing genocide in Israel right now. That's the whole story of what you are complicit in when you engage in pornography. And I know nobody wants that reality check, but what did I say that was a lie?
Everybody needs that reality check. I mean, Google's not even suppressing this story. They're kind of talking about this guy in a good way. He's given 11 million of porn profits to pro-Israel lobby group AIPAC, which in turn is going to, promote more progressive policies and censorship of the truth in America. And I mean, and of all things, Jewish Ukrainian billionaire, right? It has to be those two countries.
Oh yeah. I mean, this is where it is a little comical because it's so dark. Right? It's everything that the deep state stands for. It's you got to save Ukraine. You got to stand Israel. You have to let your daughters become prostitutes. We need your sons addicted to pornography in the name of freedom.
Yes. And I'm so sick of Christians being a year late, like a day late, a dollar short, but like a year late in understanding these things. I mean, I can't tell you the amount of Christians when Putin first invaded Ukraine that put the Ukrainian flag on their Facebook profile, right? And then 6 months later, they got a little bit like, well, maybe that's not right, and then, but a year later, it's like too late, it's too late. And you saw the same thing with Israel. It's like now they're starting to hear from people like me, okay, 30,000 Palestinians have been killed, 10,000 children, and they're calling their artificial intelligence bombing program the gospel, but yet they've still got their Star of David on their Facebook profile. It's kind of like, ooh, should I still be supporting them? Like, I'm tired of us being on the back end of truth because we have this theology that is so woven into our theological DNA. We think we just got to support them. We just have to.
Yeah, it's tied to ejecting yourself from the mainstream media. I mean, that's where the propaganda comes in and pulls on your heartstrings and portrays Putin as Hitler 2.0 and Ukrainians as hapless victims. And they completely leave out the fact that America is operating a dozen hidden military facilities in Ukraine, like on Russia's border, that they said they denied exist. And this is why Putin is doing what he's doing.
Yes.
And in the situation with Israel and Palestine, I don't know how deep we want to go on that one. I don't know if you want to stick to an agenda.
Yeah, I got some more slides to go through, and there's a little kid that's ringing the doorbell like over and over. I'm going to put this up, And I'm just going to let you go because I know quite a bit about this one, but a lot of people seriously don't know. This has to do with COVID on the left and abortion on the right. But COVID is start with that one. I mean, it's a shocker that I think everybody on the right, especially, we were just sick of all the stuff about COVID, but then nobody did the research to find out, like, wow, a lot of these key players were Jewish.
Yeah, I mean, the two players that I think of that come to mind immediately are the head of Fizer. You mentioned his name the other night. I don't know it off the top of my head, but their collusion with international NGOs such as the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum, run by Klaus Schwab, another Jew, they collude with our federal government, which Jeremy showed you before is roughly half Jewish, to determine from the top down how all of America and its 330 million people have to respond to COVID, or else you're a bad person, because they're the ones who own the media. They get to deliver the protocols for how everybody had to respond to COVID. The face mask, the social distancing, obviously the vaccines, and then the boosters. You're supposed to believe the origin story that they tell you about how it came from a wet market or a bat out of a cave, whatever else. It's definitely not a man-made virus. Only wild, crazy conspiracy theorists believe something like that. And then it turns out all the wild conspiracy theorists were right about virtually everything about COVID. The fact that it was a man-made virus, the fact that the virus contains many untested ingredients that are showing to now be harmful in the long term, the fact that the vaccine didn't stop you from getting the actual virus itself, nor transmitting it to other people, the fact that they lied about the PCR tests. What else? There's a lot of lies sewn into the media's speaker box that they just hammered us with over and over. And I mentioned previously how the Jewish people, the ADL, SPLC, NAACP, all these internet censorship engines were obviously complicit in enforcing that narrative.
Yes.
So you had the Biden administration colluding with the social media companies at the direction,
which social media companies being owned by people like Mark Zuckerberg, and I can't remember the YouTube CEO's name, but this lady, but they were both Jewish as well, and it's like it's almost laughable.
Right. I mean, it's everything. You go from the World Health Organization, run by a Jew, saying this is what you have to do. That gets passed down to the federal government, which is run by Jews who say, hey, media, this is what the government needs you to tell the citizens to do. And so you just follow this from a logical procession of where it started versus where it ended. And you find Jewish people at every single stop along the way. What was the other one? What was the other half of this?
Yeah, the other half, and there's a lot of people out there, a lot of conservatives that are very much against abortion, but they're also very pro-Zionist. And it's the different aspects of abortion. You got the father of the, you may not know as much about this. I don't know, but it's just part of the slides I put together.
That one I can obviously mention Margaret Sanger, who was the open and proud eugenicist, founder of Planned Parenthood, who actually wrote, if you go to Planned Parenthood right now, there is an apology on the organization's behalf saying they renounce its own founder's beliefs, because she was so openly hateful toward Black people. And I don't mean hateful in terms of like criticizing crime statistics, like they say we are hateful. I mean, she wanted to use eugenics to reduce the population of Black people into nothing. She hoped that they would have an abortion clinic on the corner of every Black neighborhood so that they stopped reproducing. This is who created Planned Parenthood and popularized abortion in America, and portrayed it as this compassionate economic measure to make sure everybody has an opportunity to, secure resources and whatnot before they have children. And this gets sewn into the push from Gloria Steinem's feminism delivered that says, well, abortion is also kind of like a woman's right. It's not just an economic thing, but who has a right to tell a woman she has to have the child that she got impregnated with? Who has the right to do that? Well, there is a right and wrong, right? Right and wrong didn't go away. God kind of determined those things thousands and thousands of years ago, and he elaborated it very succinctly in the New Testament. He told us what's a sin. Murder is a sin. And he told us that God knew us before the hairs even grew on our head. So we are human beings fully as soon as we are conceived, not 8 weeks later, not 16 weeks later. The moment that those two join together, the sperm and the egg, they create the embryo. You have a unique biological pattern. Today we call that DNA. That's simply science trying to desperately understand God's design, but it's helpful to understand it that way. Once that new DNA has been created, that's a life form that is owed protection 100% the same as everybody else. And one other thing I'll say on abortion is you'll see the leftists try to push back about how many weeks and at what point is it really a life, and they won't accept the Bible as I just did, as I explained. When we read that, it says God had a plan for you before you were even stitched together in your mother's womb. That's why we know it's wrong. But the leftists obviously don't adhere to the Bible. So you can't use that as a refutation when you're debating with them. But what you can do is say, let's just say your daughter was pregnant and she's out and about in the city, and some vagrant, whoever, violent person assaults her, steals her purse, in doing so harms her and terminates her pregnancy. Are you telling me that you're going to go to your daughter and tell her, I know that you're in mourning right now, and I know you had these dreams of having a child, raising it with your husband, having great grandchildren, all this other stuff, creating a family, but listen, that actually wasn't even really a child. So you really don't have anything to be that sad about. Of course you're not going to do that. Even as a stupid liberal, I shouldn't say stupid liberal person. That's
it's pretty stupid. That is stupid, though. I mean, I think that's a passable label in that case.
Right. I mean, it's just inhumane. Nobody would do that. Nobody would treat a grieving mother. She's defined as a mother because she had a life form growing inside of her. It doesn't matter how many days or weeks old it was. If that life form is ended because a criminal assaults them or in any other way, it's still a tragic loss of life, and it has to be spoken up for. And that's all Christians are doing.
Let me ask you this, Joshua. Well, first of all, do you have a lag or a delay on your end? Because I can fix that, but it's going to take 1 second.
There is probably a little bit of a lag. Yeah, I see a little bit of a frame rate.
Let me do this, because when the live stream replays, it won't have this part. I'm going to turn off my Wi-Fi, turn it right back on. We'll still have this feed going. So give me just a minute. It'll cut out. Okay, Joshua, you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. It seems a little blurry now, but let's just go with it. So what about, I've got one more slide I want to show, which has to do with immigration, but isn't this kind of Talmudic as well? Like this idea that ultimately the Jews are going to reign over all of the Goyim, all of humanity. They need to depopulate at a big level, which would go along with abortion. And they also want to rule over us, just like I read in that Hebrew Talisman book about we will be gardeners working at starvation wages in Israel as the Goyim. This was a book that one of the Rothschilds had in his possessions when he died. But isn't that abortion a part of that? I mean, I don't know that they're wanting to abort their own babies. I could be wrong on that, but is that a part of the depopulation?
Oh, clearly. Yeah. The same with the vaccines, the same with the pushing of homosexuality and transgenderism. They're all different legs of the stool, so to speak, of population reduction. Stuff that they have Bill Gates, the useful, convenient goy, pushing on their behalf. They give him worldwide, internationally renowned philanthropist title. Oh man, we got to love Bill Gates because he gave $200 million to whatever charity. That just makes him a good person, right? Well, never mind the fact that he is openly acknowledged the fact that he wants to depopulate the earth.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of a problem to us. We view life as sacred. We don't like killing people, no matter how young or in the womb they still are. So, the depopulation thing is very much tied to their end game prophecy, where the goy will be their subservient slave people who do they mill the fields and they lay the bricks and all that kind of stuff. We'll be allowed to do that, but we will not be able to decide how the government functions. You will not be able to decide to worship Jesus Christ openly. That's not going to be part of the future Jewish world that they're trying to achieve. So we got to prevent that from happening right now.
And in my own studies, I'm putting together something pretty dark. I mean, if you look at the initial infiltration of our Christian Zionist theology, which came about in the 1820s, 1830s, led into Darby and Schofield and so on. Many people do know that story. if you go back to the source writings and what they believed about the resuming of the old covenant law coming back, because a lot of John MacArthur preaches that there will be a third Jewish temple and that Jesus will act as high priest over that. There'll be animal sacrifices and the whole bit. It's all coming back. And you look at how did that infiltrate? How did that come into Christian theology? There were the Rothschilds and others that were pushing that. And it kind of goes along with this idea of us being eventually Christians will be the slaves underneath a Jewish structure that is created. So it's coming at us from a lot of angles. One last one, then I want to get on to solutions. Immigration. You'll hear from Charlie Kirk to even guys like Ben Shapiro, who is Jewish, will speak against open borders all the time. Yet when you pull this up, these are the Jewish NGOs promoting mass immigration. I don't even, and that HIAS, I don't know the acronym. That's one of the big ones right now that's promoting and funding this open border policy that we currently have. So tell me a little bit about how all this plays into it in your opinion.
Yeah, HIAS, actually, Ben Shapiro is a donor of. So he can get on his conservative platform that has made him a millionaire all day long and talk about how he is now against immigration. But the fact of the matter is he did donate money to pro-immigration groups. And two, the infamous tweet that has been around for years where he says, I don't give a damn about the browning of America. It's captured. It's there. It's on the historical record. Why this matters, why this is part of Jewish culture, this push for unending immigration into our nation and every other European nation. The Jewish people, ever since the destruction of the Second Temple, were cast out into the diaspora. And as Christians, we understand this as their literal racial curse. God cursed them as a race of people for rejecting the Messiah. And the toll of this punishment is to live in exile without a land of their own until the end times. That's the punishment for rejecting the Messiah, according to the New Testament. So this was supposed to be, and this is actually also what Hasidic Orthodox Jews believe as well. They agree with that. Yeah. They say, yeah, that's us. This is the current state of affairs is us waiting for the Messiah in exile. That's not what Zionists believe, obviously. They took it into their own hands and said, we're going to go and rebuild the promised land now, and we're going to go erect the third temple now, and that's going to bring about the Messiah, which will bring about this future utopian state where we're the leadership and all the goyim are the slave class. The only thing with immigration that Christians really have to understand and how it's related to their Jewish, I call them adversaries because they are literally anti-Christ. Because they're an international people, wherever they go, they will be the minority, right? This is a mathematics equation. Mm-hmm. So whatever settlement they find themselves kind of coalescing in, even at the peak of their settlement, like in America, for example, where there's a lot of Jews, they're still only 2% of the nation. So when they're practicing this very different culture than their Christian compatriots living here in America, if America were just us Christians and these Jews, then their cultural practices, their Talmudic practices would stand out like a sore thumb. Mm-hmm. They would be endorsing transgenderism. They would be saying homosexuals can get married. They would be saying abortion is not even killing a person. They would be inverting the genders and saying women can run society and all this other stuff that is so clearly anti-Christian. It would be very easy to point a finger to them as pushing these ideologies if they were the only other group of people who were not Christians, not Europeans in the nation. So what they have to do in order to camouflage themselves is to promote diversity. And they're on the record of saying this. You can go to jewishcontributions.com. It's a great resource for all of these things. And they're on the record as publicly endorsing immigration for all European nations. Barbara Lerner Specter, for example, is an American Jew who decided to make it her life's purpose to move to Sweden and start the Swedish Jewish Institute for Immigration or something along those lines, and basically convince the Swedish government that open border policies are the best thing for Sweden. And she is just one example of Jews infiltrating the government in these various countries and saying diversity is a strength and you're immoral if you disagree with me. you're basically a Nazi if you don't want your country to be flooded with people who have nothing to do with your history, who don't share your culture, don't share the same holidays, don't organize the same way, who actually hate your ancestors in many cases. You're supposed to believe that you're a bad person if you don't love the idea of inviting countless other ethnic groups into your own nation. So that's the tie between immigration and the Jewish people running our foreign policy and our domestic policy. And it's beautiful in the way they do this, that they use the neocon. We mentioned the two sides before. They use the conservative neocon war hawks to push all of these Middle Eastern wars. What do these Middle Eastern wars every single time create? Refugees. Okay, refugees is a fancy word for foreign immigrants. They have to go somewhere, and that somewhere is, in most occasions, European nations and America. So they create the military situations that displace all of these people in the global South and the Middle East. And then they say, hey, why don't one of these countries who love diversity go ahead and welcome these people in? But the problem is, I don't love diversity. Many people actually don't love diversity. I like my people and my cultural practices. I don't hate other cultures, and I don't hate other people, and I don't hate other religions. But when it comes to what do I like the most, I like Christian culture and I like European culture. That's why I live in a Christian European nation. If I wanted to experience Central American culture or African culture or Middle Eastern culture, then I would probably go to those places. But it's not just me, it's everybody watching this, and it's the entire globe that agrees with me, because when you look at global immigration patterns, it's the global South moving into European nations. We create amazing cultures that are safe, prosperous. People are given very broad rights. I want to preserve that in the nation that my ancestors built, but I'm a bad person because of this. It somehow makes me xenophobic, Islamophobic, anti-Semitic, racist, bigot, and so on and so forth, because I actually stand back and say, not so much diversity. I don't want religious diversity. I want Christianity, and I don't want ethnic diversity. I like what the Europeans built. When I look around the world, I don't see places outside of European countries that I would ever want to live. And the dirty thing is that virtually everybody agrees with me. And as I said, that's true if you just look at the global immigration patterns, but nobody wants to say that.
Yeah. There's this interesting, we've been so indoctrinated that even as you're like, I'm getting past some of the guilt points I used to would have felt as you're talking, because I'm realizing where it's coming from. And I think one case in point you can make is, hey, if you feel awkward about things Joshua just said, do you expect, like, I don't know exactly what the percentages of the races are in China, but I think it's really high Chinese, maybe like above 90%, maybe 95. And
Well, yeah,
we don't expect China or Japan to, well, gosh, they're just bigots because they're not trying to get all of these other nations into China, or all of these other nations into Japan, or Ethiopia for that matter. Like, we don't expect it of other nations. We just expect it of ourselves, because we've been so indoctrinated to believe that, well, that's the way that it should be, or else we are racist.
it's very cruel in that it's not just that they delivered that message and that indoctrination to the populace. They did it in such a nuanced way that said it's only bad when white people do it.
Right.
If you're a black person who says African nations should remain majority African, oh yeah, you're right. Obviously, duh.
Yeah. It feels totally
Okay.
normal to hear you say that. Totally normal.
Yeah, and the same is true with Asia. You mentioned, and this is where I nerd out. I sit around and memorize things like this. China is 92% Chinese. Japan is up to 97% at times. Okay, that's not an organic phenomenon. That's maintained by force with the law, with the consent of all the people. The people like this. The people don't revolt. People in China and Japan are not sitting around looking at America and being like, God, they have all that diversity there. Man, I wish we could bring in some Africans and some people from the Middle East. I wish Jewish people ran all our institutions. That's not how the world works.
Yeah.
So you're right. I mentioned Jared Taylor to you offline as one of the people who are probably most well-known, well-respected, morally unimpeachable people who have been trying to move the white advocacy work forward. This whole subject of just pointing to the hypocrisy, saying you would never expect people in any other part of the world to adhere to the same set of morality that you have forced on white people. This self-hatred and this white guilt, to actually criminalize the two words together, white pride, when black pride, Asian pride, Jewish pride, Indian pride, none of these things are immoral except white pride.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope everybody, just from this small piece of the conversation, understands that when we, especially myself, because I've been doing this for a while, and Jeremy's explaining how he's getting a little bit more comfortable, and he's starting to get the connections between the Jewish influence and how they're subverting the ethnic identity of America and why that matters. It's a very uncomfortable subject to start talking about. Like, the only reason I can do it pretty articulately and confidently and I don't get nervous and all that is because I've done it 100, 200 times. Mm-hmm. So I know there's going to be a lot of people who watch this who agree emotionally. It's logical. I point to China, Japan. The same is true in India. They're 80% Indian. If you take the average of Africa, they're 80% African. And let's just talk about Israel. Is there any way you're going to be able to convince a Jewish person that more diversity in Israel is the best thing for them? Well, I don't think so. And I can point to actual evidence of that, where the Israeli government sterilized African Jews wanting to come to Israel to make sure that they couldn't reproduce. You may have heard this story, but when the
I've heard it told. I've never researched it myself, but you're saying you can verify that this is a true thing. It's not some. I mean, it's real.
Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, published articles about this.
Okay.
So, people should look it up in their own time. But Israeli people, Jewish people, they know that the nation of Israel is a Jewish nation. It's built by Jews, for Jews, meant to protect Jews. And nobody questions that. Nobody questions the fact that they have an open, celebrated ethno-state. We're supposed to believe that a nation being an ethno-state is somehow symbolic of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis and immorality to no limitation. If you have an ethno-state, wow, you're just a nation of just awful people. Okay, well, there's over 1 billion people living in an ethno-state called China. Are they all immoral? Are the billion plus people, or the 80% of that 1 billion in India, also immoral? I mean, the fact of the matter is, white people are a global minority. This is important for people to learn. And sometimes I forget to mention it.
Yeah.
I want to mention a couple of things on this. One, white people are a global minority. We're something, depending on what numbers you look at, some people say as low as 8%. The highest that we are is 12%. But all the European nations together, America, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, we are only, like I said, 10 to 12% of the world. Okay. Just absorb that fact.
Yes.
Next
real quick. I'm so sorry, Joshua. I tried to find those numbers before we ever talked the other day. Like, I was looking up what are the races globally. Now, you can find them country by country, but I think that those numbers, as simple as this is, are being suppressed, because I looked it up on multiple search engines. I could not find a simple to read breakdown of global ethnic percentages.
I went through the exact same exercise, and I even tried to do it manually. I said, you know what? Fine. If you're not going to give me a summary, if you're going to keep this information from the people, I will go and look at every European nation, pull their census data. And it was just a very laborious exercise, frankly, and I got tired of doing it. But
I bet
the best numbers, the most accurate that I have seen, put the numbers between 10 and 12%.
Where can you go to find it?
The second fact that bolts onto this is the fact that, you can go fact check this immediately, whites have a negative birth rate, especially here in America. Like, we are literally not replacing ourselves with the 2.7 children or whatever it is that's required per marriage to grow our population. That's not true for the minority groups in America. And when they're bringing in, as a third point of this, almost exclusively non-white people to the population, these three changes in our demographic happen simultaneously. The immigration flooding into here, the negative birth rates. We are on a very fast downhill trajectory when it comes to the white majority in America. Technically, right now, we have a 58% majority. And that's very close to no longer even being a majority at the 51% mark, right? Now, the 58% is all white people. When you look at the Gen Z generation, the most recent generation, they're already a minority. So as the older people in America age out and pass away, the next generation coming up is less and less white with every generation. And the negative birth rates, unless that's fixed, that problem is not going to change. And with the immigration situation of bringing in 2 million non-white people every single year, that's just going to make it happen even faster. And so I'm a mathematics guy. People need to hear the numbers. If we're currently 58%, in the next 20 years, you're looking at America being a 25 to 30% white country. 1 out of 3 people everywhere you go are going to be white. There are very real implications to this for white people. If you think that the eventual, what we call minority now, but the non-white individuals in the nation who are going to be in the most powerful levers of influence in the government, in the media, and banking, and all those other institutions I mentioned, if they're all carrying a historical grievance about slavery and about colonialism and about what happened with the Native Americans, and everybody has this unspoken disapproval of white people, they're not going to treat us better when we're the minority. That's a sobering thing to think about. It's not going to get better. They're not going to start treating us better once we have let them assume the majority status. So it's just a cautionary flag to raise to everybody to say, this isn't about hating other races. This is saying America is a white nation. White nations deserve to be protected just like black nations, just like Asian nations, and just like the Jewish nation of Israel. It's not immoral for us to say we have an ethnic identity. For the first 350 years of this country's existence, we were 90% white. It's only in the last 60 years that this has changed. So those are hard numbers. The dates, 1965 forward, the Hart-Celler Immigration Act. Look up the United States Census Bureau information and fact check me. Go see, are we really 58% white right now? Only 60 years ago, were we really 90%? That's only one lifetime. So if you can slide 30% in one lifetime, when you and I pass away here in hopefully a very long time, but seriously, it's just one lifetime, America really will be a 25 to 30% white country. And feel however you want about that. That's just a reality. If people don't stand up, get called racist right now, get called anti-Semitic for pointing out the fact that it's Jewish people pushing all of this, pushing the immigration, pushing the transgenderism and homosexuality, publishing books that say the problem with whiteness. John Leibowitz Stewart having an entire Apple special episode called The Problem with White People. Mm-hmm. It's this, all of this has to be spoken about in the open, and it's not a matter of hatred, even though these people very clearly are expressing hatred towards us. I don't hate anybody else. I love my people, just like Jewish people love their people, and African people love their people, and so on. That's how you defend yourself. Whenever you're feeling uncomfortable about this whole racial argument, just point to the rest of the world. Nobody has this problem other than white European people.
Well, let's talk. It's a great synopsis you just gave. Let's talk solutions. And I'm going to continue to go back to you as the main guy on camera, because for some reason, when it's both of us, I keep seeing this slowdown and this lag. So thank you guys for watching nevertheless, because I think you can hear us just fine. Regarding solutions, so we're in deep, man. I mean, to go from, high majority white Christian to now we're talking about just races, 58% white European. There's going to be a divergence here with my audience between, well, okay, I understand that historically white Christian kind of went together, but can't we just make this about the Christian faith? Why can't we just do that? So bearing that in mind, because that's where the audience is going to be split into two camps, those that connect those two things and those that do not. But tell me about some solutions. Like, what's a path forward so that this does not continue in terms of the, I think, satanic influence into our nation and our national policy?
Well, we don't want to stand by and allow ethnocide to happen, where they literally breed white people out of existence and they take over their countries and eliminate us. And this goes very, very far back to the Holy Roman Empire. But keeping it focused on solutions, what can we actually do about this? Number one, No more oikophobia. This is one of my favorite words. Most people have never heard of it. I hadn't heard of it until a year ago. I stumbled upon a book called Western Self-Contempt, Oikophobia in the Decline of Civilizations. Oikophobia is the opposite of xenophobia. So where xenophobia says you have some kind of like natural inclination to dislike or to push away people who are not like you, oikophobia is the opposite. It is pushing away your own people for whatever reason, whatever has convinced you to push away your own people, reject your own family, your own ancestors, your own national identity. That is oikophobia. Benedict Beckold is the guy who wrote that book. I highly suggest it. But it goes into detail about some historical examples, such as the fall of Rome. And it talks about this arc of human history where nations become very, very affluent. They enjoy the success economically, that being, one of the leading nations, or the current empire that's in the dominant hierarchy of the world status. They reach this point of affluency where they no longer have substantial foreign threats. And so people aren't preoccupied with simply keeping their country alive anymore. They're living the good life. They're on the gravy train. And the problems that you used to have, such as defending your border, making sure your people aren't eliminated, you start to focus on other problems because those problems don't exist. And this is what happened to America. America got to the point of being the unipolar power in the world in the mid 20th century. So, 1950, you emerged from World War II, and the collapse of the Soviet Union left this power vacuum where America stepped in and became the global hegemony. We had the most powerful military, the most powerful economy, a government that had diplomatic abilities to shape affairs all throughout the world. Those are things worth being proud of, and that's great that we achieved that. But the problem is we then turned inward because our foreign threats had been so successfully dismantled. Jewish people saw this as an opportunity to deracinate the nation. Now that we weren't focused on defending ourselves from the Soviets and the Nazis and so on, they started using class Marxism, gender Marxism, and race Marxism to say this group of people are oppressed, these other people over here are their oppressors. And that's where you get this civil rights movement and the push for feminism. And they started basically creating wounds within the country that have only grown over time. So my first thing is no more oikophobia. You cannot be ashamed of America's history. You can't be ashamed of white people's history because they haven't done anything different than the other empires that have risen and fallen throughout human history. You can look at the Egyptian Empire. They absolutely used slavery. You can look at the Ottoman Empire. Did they expand their territory through military imperialism, forcing people to speak their language, forcing people to adopt their religion, annexing territories around them through brute force and violence, ethnic placement, genocide? Every other empire, unfortunately, this is human history, like the human race's history, have resorted to these violent and inhumane things in the past. It's not exclusive to white people. The only reason there's such a concentration on it right now is because we're the most recent example of having committed colonialism, which is just imperialism. And the slave trade, this is the most ironic thing in terms of, for some reason, whites being portrayed as uniquely evil as compared to everybody else, when it was indeed white people who made it a priority to go about the entire globe and end the practice of human slavery. So no more oikophobia. That's my practical first point of advice, is get educated on the rest of human history so you know that your ancestors, these people that we're supposed to feel terrible about and just cry endlessly about slavery and colonialism and what happened to the Native Americans, that's just proof that white people are terrible. No, that's not true whatsoever. No more white guilt. We don't, and this is the thing, we don't have time. We don't have time for the white guilt and the shame that we're supposed to sit here dwelling in when I'm watching my country lose 30% of its majority in one lifetime, and it's getting faster. So it's not even going to take one lifetime to lose another 30%. So no more oikophobia. Do you want me to go into a second one, or do you want to add some flavor there?
No, that's really good. The only flavor I would add is you mentioned Marxism using oikophobia as a tool. And if you look up a lot of predominant great, when I say great, I mean that in the sense of well-known Jewish thinkers, many of them will openly say that communism or Marxism is a predominantly Jewish ideology. It's a concept, and Marx himself, I think his name was Chaim Mordecai Levy. I believe that was his actual real name, if I've got that
Yep.
correct. I mean, he was Jewish. A lot of people don't know that. I brought that up to someone the other day, that Karl Marx was Jewish, and they like argued with me about it. They said, no, he's not. But he was. And so do you see communism as something that Jewish people like to use as a tool to subvert other nations, or something that they truly believe in as something that should be done even for themselves, where they're at the top?
I mean, I guess it could apply to both, honestly. They know it's a very useful political tool to deracinate nations because it destroys the nuclear family. It places all of the entrust for further keeping the nation alive with its people into the hands of the government rather than fully autonomous, sovereign only to God nuclear families. They want you to turn that over to the control of the state, turn your children over to the control of the state, turn your economic productive capacity, whatever you want to be doing, whatever you're good at. They want to say, well, it's actually more important that the government decides what you do. So you might want to be a politician and you might be a brilliant author or whatever, but if we don't like your ideology, I think the government might step in and say, we would rather have you farming. We would rather have you in the coal mine. And so it's a great way to suppress any kind of dissident ideology. But it's much more important, the aspects of eliminating family, because it is a direct inversion of the Christian model of the nuclear family. It's a heat-seeking missile that just goes
Yeah.
straight to that and eliminates it.
It's
And they know
interesting.
that.
Yes, and we brought up Gloria Steinem. I used to have a quote when I was researching all the things about the attack on men and masculinity. I had a quote from her that she's a very well-known feminist. And again, we brought her up earlier, where she was saying, like, the great secret behind feminism or communism is not that we're just wanting to empower women. We want to destroy the idea of the nuclear family entirely. We've got to get rid of that. And it was one of those rare times, and she's still alive today. So I think still a professor, still an author. I believe she's still alive, but either way, there's these occasional times where they'll accidentally or on purpose say the truth out loud, and it's mind blowing when they do it.
Well, that makes me think of another example just like that. The lady I mentioned earlier, Barbara Lerner Specter, the American Jew who went to go live in Sweden and tell them how important it was for them to become a multicultural nation. The full quote goes something along the lines of, Europe has not yet learned to be a multicultural continent. And us Jews are going to play a major part in changing that. And people will hate us because of that. This is her words. So, I mean, she's fully acknowledging the fact that we Jews, as an international group of people, do indeed push diversity on nations that are not currently diverse against their will. And we know that we are disliked because of this, but they just have to get over it. They have not yet embraced diversity. That's what she said. It's like, well, neither is China, and neither is Japan, and neither is most of Africa, and neither does Israel. So why are you expecting European people to do it and calling us Adolf Hitler when we try to resist?
Yeah.
Because that's coincidentally exactly what Adolf Hitler did. He said, we're German people, and we're not going to change that. And the Jews living amongst us right now are pushing all this multiculturalism and communism. He knew about the Bolshevik Revolution, and he knew about Marxism. And he knew about the Rothschild International Banking Syndicate.
Oh, yeah.
And this isn't an endorsement of Hitler, obviously, but it is the full truth that this is why this person has become so demonized and so touchy to talk about, because he stands in direct opposition to many of the things, the weapons that Jewish people use to their own self-advantage, to our disadvantage.
Yeah. And, I've talked to you about that kind of undisclosed, it was finally released recording between Billy Graham and Richard Nixon, where they were having a conversation about this exact thing. And they both agreed. They said, look what happened in Germany prior to Hitler. Like, these Jewish people were taking control of everything, the politics, the media, the businesses. And now they said, now Hitler went about it wrong, but it's happening in this country. And if we don't get a handle on it, and it was Billy Graham said, this country's going to go down the drain. And Nixon said, you know what, Billy, I could never say it out loud, but I believe it. And it's just an incredible moment. And I think Christians need to hear that and understand that didn't make Billy Graham anti-Semitic. In fact, he was known as a friend of the Jewish people. I mean, well known as that. But at the same time, like, there have been great leaders, even General Patton, after the war was over. He had things to say right before he died, and it's a very suspicious death, about these exact topics. It's just like over and over and over, you see these people talk about it, and then they're silenced.
Yeah, one of the other most important takeaways of anybody watching this conversation, or the last one, is to understand how they have built this bubble of irreproach around all Jewish people, whether that's religious, whether that's ethnic, or that's the nation of Israel. They have used political correctness and language to make them immune to criticism. And so the way they do that is by using slander. They say, if you're critical in any fashion towards any of those three components of international Jewry, the nation of Israel, the ethnicity, their cultural practices, or the religion, they say, what are you, some kind of Nazi? You some kind of Hitler? And then the conversation's just over, because everybody is so emotionally programmed when they hear those words. If you receive an accusation of being similar to Hitler or similar to the Nazis, it's a chilling effect. This is especially true when they accuse influential people of this. You know, if you're running for local government or you're trying to actually make a meaningful change in politics, you get that anti-Semite label, somebody starts calling you Hitler, it can be the end of your endeavors. They know this. They get people fired from their jobs using this exact tactic. They get you banned from social media using this exact tactic. If you try to just speak objectively about what Hitler was trying to accomplish, that's it. Like, you can't even go there. You can't even portray the fact that he rescued Germany's economy from the gutter.
Yeah.
Right? You just can't say anything positive about this.
And we don't want to. Yeah. Let's move on, because I do want to spend a little more time on solutions. So, what's another thing that we can do considering the current state of affairs?
I got 5, and they all have sub bullets. So I don't know how much time we have tonight.
Well, let's just keep going, because you and I could talk forever about the history and all that stuff, but I want us to stay on solutions till we end this thing.
Well, I did go over one of them earlier, so I guess I only have 4 left. The one of them that I went over earlier, quick reminder, stop watching the pornography, okay? I know it's awkward for us to call you out. I know everybody's guilty of it. Anybody who grew up I think even the boomers caught on to it too. But especially if you grew up in the digital era, with this internet pornography being so prevalent in our society, it's the dirty secret of our society. I gave you guys the numbers earlier, half of our population. So you have no reason to feel especially self-conscious or dirty or awful about it. But as Christians, we understand repentance and what repentance actually means. It means turning away and not going back. It doesn't mean you'll never stumble again. I'm not saying that. But on this subject, because I mentioned very thoroughly before the ties of how the Jewish people use this for their interest. They like the negative birth rates. They like feminism, right? They like killing our nuclear families. And they know pornography is gasoline on all of those problems. And then they take the ill-gotten gains from it and invest in their own politicians and in their own murderous ethno-state. So you have to eject yourself from the world of pornography. That's a practical thing that we can all do, that I pray everybody succeeds with. It's not an easy thing, but you guys can do it. I have written down, use your time wisely, because we don't have time to waste. So how should everybody be using their time? Get right with God. As a Christian, there's 3 major components to our life as our Christian. The Christian lifestyle, so to speak, has to include regular church attendance, reading the Bible, the actual Word of God, and praying. Those are activities that you got to be able to check off on a weekly basis. If you're calling yourself a Christian and you sit around and think, it's actually been like months, for many of them years since they've been to church, but they still call themselves Christian, you got to go to church. You guys got to engage in fellowship, because it's not just you go and you listen to the sermon. And hopefully the sermon was powerful. It had the right message you needed to hear. That's all true. This hit me one day when I was at church. The other people there, however large the congregation is, they see you. They know that you're a Christian because you're standing in a Christian church worshiping Jesus Christ. You showed up. You sacrificed your time. Hopefully you put on some decent clothes, wear what you will. I get it. But you intentionally carved out time of your week where you could have been doing something else, and you prioritized learning and being close to God's word and your fellow Christians. That is so invaluable. Like, there's literally no way to quantify the value of just showing up as a Christian. People need to know that our numbers are still strong. When you fall into the habit of watching church online every Sunday, guilty, by the way, I've done it for periods of time. We all know what happened with COVID, and that kind of introduced that you could do that on a regular basis, which a very nefarious, sneaky thing to do, by the way, when they made it illegal to actually go to church.
Yeah.
And then they just said, listen, you can watch it online. It's the same thing. Actually, no, it's not, because my church that I go to has a congregation of 300 people per sermon, 3 sermons a Sunday. That's 1,000 people. Just that one church in my one city. We got to see the numbers to know that the things we believe are still very popular. The things we believe are still the majority in our country. It might feel like whatever is said in Netflix and Hollywood and the recording industries and on CNN, they might be talking about abortion and transgenderism and blah, blah, blah. And it seems like that's just the majority of how America operates now. But currently, the numbers do say that 60% of America purport to be Christian. Now, when you get down into actual church attendance, actually reading the Bible regularly, the numbers are worse. It's 60% at a high level, but it's like as low as 11% actually purport to read the Bible on a daily basis. And then church participation is somewhere in the middle. I can't remember. I think it might be closer to like 50% of the Christians. So that's another thing that you guys can do. You got to get deep in relationship with God and your fellow Christians. And that's not that hard. That's not asking you to go out and have super difficult conversations with non-Christians. That's just showing up for yourself, for Christ, and for your fellow Christians.
Yes. Can I speak to this for a second on a personal note, Joshua?
Absolutely, my friend. Go ahead.
Okay. And I hate to interrupt because I know you're rolling there, but you know, when it comes to me, for me, alcohol is a problem. For me, pornography has been a problem. And then obviously all of us wrestle with having a closer walk with the Lord. This year I've given up drinking. I've not had anything to drink since around Christmas time. And I have, you know, really, really worked hard on the other areas as well. And there's been a strength that's come about, a strength in my spirit to actually pursue these difficult topics. And I was looking at these things in the past, but specifically for, and again, I know you hadn't brought up liquor or alcohol, but for me, what that would do is I'd be going down the track of like learning more about this stuff and even being willing to talk about it because I saw it as a legitimate problem. But the alcohol would cause me to feel like this guilt because there was lying in my life. So whatever your thing is, there was like this hypocrisy I felt. Therefore, I felt I didn't have the strength to continue looking into these things. And like this morning, I prayed for a long time on a walk, like, Lord, I feel strongly that this is a real issue that we as Christians have to address. And if I'm wrong on this, like, speak to my spirit, let me know. And it's almost like the more that I get closer to the Lord, the more I feel a strength to actually pursue it and say these truths out loud. Whereas I think a lot of Christians would think the opposite, like, wow, if you're talking out against the Jews, man, you must be deep in sin. So it's like the opposite thing is happening.
It's true. I mean, the more time you spend with the word, the more you'll know that it is true and that it hasn't changed. Morality hasn't changed in 2,000 years. It's exactly as Jesus Christ prescribed it. That's how marriage should work, and that's how the gender should operate. But if you're not actively reminding yourself, that's what the time with the Bible does, and that's what going to church does, and that's what being in conversation with God, praying, does. And so if you're not doing all 3 of those things as part of your daily and weekly life, you will unintentionally slide into cowardice because the world will just barrage you with gay pride flags and with girl boss. What do you just hate women? You want to take opportunities away from women? You don't think women are equal to men? And they'll just say these things that present the argument in the least charitable way to make you feel like you're somehow a terrible person for just speaking the words that you know are for sure in the Bible.
Yeah.
So spend a lot of time there. So that's using your time wisely. And I will say as a sub bullet point to that, because that's all focused on spending your time as a Christian engaging in Christian activities. Simultaneously to that, we have a severe problem with physical health in this country. And I mean, it's like way out of control. Obesity has not doubled, it has tripled in the last 50 years. The average woman in America is 40% body fat. And I know this is another thing that's just like not fun to talk about. A lot of people feel called out when you start talking about obesity and the kind of slovenly behavior lifestyle that we've all as Americans fallen into. But in my own personal experience, you can't have great mental health or spiritual health when you are neglecting your physical health. When you have these nagging ailments, aches and pains, you're not happy with the way you look. And the reason you're not happy with the way you look is because you know it's your fault. God didn't curse you to be a lazy person. And he didn't curse you to put spoonfuls of Oreo ice cream into your mouth. A lot of these things are the results of your own individual behaviors, and you're avoiding accountability, and you're hoping that the world will write you the check that says you can be healthy at any weight, which they very eagerly will because they want to sell you Oreo ice cream.
Yeah.
So we got to say, I know what the world says is okay, but according to the Bible, my favorite thing to wave around, it tells me that gluttony is a sin and that sloth is a sin. So habitual avoidance of exercise, that is literally sinful because it's a harm upon God's gift to you, the physical temple that houses the Holy Spirit. Somebody explained it to me once this way, that the Holy Spirit obviously dwells within us. What protects your innards, your heart, your brain, your organs? The physical temple that God gives you to protect the Spirit of Jesus Christ matters. You can't neglect it. You can't treat it like it's a dumpster.
Yeah.
So I would encourage everybody who has neglected that facet of their life, and this is coming from a guy, by the way, who spent the first 27 years of my life making fun of athletes, making fun of people that went to the gym. I myself was a skinny, fat, not so healthy individual, drinking far too much, living off of frozen food and McDonald's and whatnot. So I was fully addicted to the goy slop, as they call it. And once I fixed that, that was a huge improvement to my life. Just getting my diet in check, consistent calorie consumption, not having these wild fluctuations. It evened out my self-image once I actually improved my body and got into good shape. So you got to be physically healthy before you can be mentally or spiritually healthy. If you're sitting around in physical pain due to your neglect, you start falling into that mindset of, God, why are you doing this to me? What did I do to have such an uncomfortable, physically painful life? Why do my knees have to hurt? Why does my back have to hurt? And if you're not willing to look at the pattern of behavior in your life for the decades before that, where you neglected exercise and you ate whatever you wanted, that's not God punishing you. That's you reaping what you sowed.
Yes. And once again, Joshua, like anything the world is promoting at a high level, you can pretty much know, like, okay, this is bad for me. And right now, all I got to do is walk into Walmart, walk into Target, or look at regular TV commercials and look at the kind of body image that they're promoting as a positive thing. You're going to see mostly fat Black women at Target on all the walls. It just is what it is. And if you turn on the commercials, it's like these effeminate yet heavy-set men, pretty much if there's men at all in the commercial. Always, interracial families. You'll rarely ever see a fully white family. So like this is an agenda. And there was I think it was Newsweek, may have not been Newsweek, but some well-known periodical not too long ago was saying white men who care about their physical body, who are in shape, are dangerous. And it's akin to Nazism. And it's like, it's so obvious the agenda they're trying to promote. It makes me want to do it even more.
Yeah, I can give you guys a super tangible example of why being in good physical shape matters. It's not a matter of vanity. It's not about how you look next to the swimming pool. I was living in Portland, Oregon, which is modern day Sodom and Gomorrah. The gates of hell have fully opened, decriminalized all drugs. People are doing the gay pride parades in the street. Everybody's got green hair and all this other stuff. I'm at the public park on a first date. This is a stranger to me. This woman, I've known her for all of 5 minutes. And I'm there with my dog, and we're just walking in the park. And my dog goes up and sniffs the dog at the bench over here. And there's two guys with the dog. And suddenly their dog Cujo's out and starts snapping and trying to bite my dog. And so unfortunately, I pull on the leash of my dog, trying to pull him away from the conflict, and the collar gets pulled off over his head. So now I have no way to actually pull my dog out of the conflict. Well, the owner of the other dog just drops his leash because he's not trying to get into the middle of his dog trying to kill my dog. And so his much larger dog has my little sweet pug in his mouth and is running down the sidewalk with my dog in his mouth.
Jeez.
It's only because I am in peak physical shape and I try to stay that way year round for as long as I can until my body gives out, that I could sprint after this dog, tackle it, and rescue my dog's life. If I'm some guy who's 100 pounds overweight, who's going to trip over his own 2 feet when some crisis scenario happens, it was my dog this time, but the dog could have bit your daughter or your son.
Yeah.
It could have been any other situation where you have to respond in real time to physically defend yourself or your loved ones. And I'm sorry, but when I go outside and I look at the average male population, I don't see people who can adequately defend their families on average. Obviously there's exceptions, but like this shit really matters. And they know this. I mean, the people pushing the goy slop and telling you can be healthy at any weight, they want a weak, effeminized male population so that we can't push back.
100%.
And this is obviously related to the gun grabs too. They want to take away the guns. That way, if you can't protect yourself physically, well, maybe you can rely on a gun. Oh, well, actually, they're trying to take those away too.
Yes.
So,
it's like anything that would lend itself to personal strength, confidence, the ability to defend. They want to remove that. Period. So you nailed it. Keep going.
Yeah, I like that you specifically called out confidence, because that was one thing in my life that was admittedly missing before I got into great shape and improved my self-image, which isn't, people misinterpret it as your self-image is better because you look in the mirror and you look better. No, that's not what improves your self-image. What improves your self-image is knowing that you did work other people say is too difficult or too inconvenient, too time-consuming to do. And you did it hundreds of times. You looked at the piece of cheesecake or the bag of chips or whatever else, the alcohol, and you said, I'm not going to make the same decision as the rest of the population. I'm going to practice moderation. I'm not going to give in to gluttony. And likewise, I made the harder decision 4 or 5 days a week to go to the gym and take care of this thing that God gave me. Whereas I know the majority of the population, they're not making that decision. They're making the easy decision. I just worked a full 8-hour workday. I'm mentally exhausted. I really don't feel like going to the gym. And I get it. I used to be the same guy. I know. But the self-image that improves over time comes from you doing things that other people refuse to do. Hard things that are not easy or not fun. Mm-hmm. So it's not about looking a certain way. And that's what improves your self-image, which gives you confidence, which is very important when it comes to presenting yourself to the world. Whenever we have to sit down and have these conversations in front of a bunch of strangers, like literally the most controversial subjects that there are on the planet, talking about Jewish people, being an advocate for white people. I mean, these things are as hot as the hot water gets. You have to be confident going into that. And so if you're not even happy about the way you look, you're not going to be happy with the way you look on camera. You're probably going to be trying to avoid cameras. You're probably trying to avoid attention.
That's right.
So, it's all small pieces of the puzzle that they have intentionally kept us from assembling. They say, don't care about your physical health. You can go to church at home, online, disengage from all this stuff, just become a lazy, sloven-like, lukewarm Christian. It's for the best. It's compassion towards everybody if you just have no standards for yourself. We got to hold ourselves to a much higher standard as Christians, as people who know what made this country succeed. It's not a hidden formula.
These are just real quick, so we can flow, because there's one thing I so meant to ask you about at the start of this program, and I forgot. I want to hit it on the end because I think it's super powerful. You got 2 more bullet points or 3?
We talked about pornography. We talked about that. Stop consuming mainstream media and Hollywood content. I think we pretty much tie that into the discussion with Disney and so on, because those things are indoctrination machines. I mean, they are 24/7 beacons of multiculturalism, homosexuality, transgenderism, feminism, communism, socialist garbage. That's what that stuff is. So you got to eject from the pornography world, and you have to eject from the mainstream media world. The last one that I had on my list, infiltration. This keep in mind, the whole theme is, what can we do?
Yes.
These are all things that you could actually go out and do. I understand you can't end the Federal Reserve, right? We can't do something like that. That's fine. But what we can do is infiltrate in a legal, nonviolent way these institutions who hold so much influence over our country. So higher education, the Ivy League schools, we need people going to those schools who believe in Jesus Christ and believe that Jesus is God, and that actually care about the white race and don't hate it and don't hate the white people's ancestors. So we got to not give up on educating ourselves. We actually have to be engaged with that. We have to infiltrate the government in the same fashion. People have to become district attorneys, and they have to become mayors and governors, and eventually get into the federal government and all this. So when we use that word infiltrate, it's not a deceptive thing. Don't tell a single lie to do this. I'm not advocating any kind of dishonesty, because obviously Christians don't believe in that. Do so on the back of your professional capabilities and talents, which means you have to develop those. So those civil institutions, we have to infiltrate them. And the way that that is done is by investing in yourself. You invest in your spirituality through all the stuff we talked about earlier. You invest in your education by being, smart with your resources, actually paying for your education if you have to, devoting the time to researching these subjects. I know it's laborious. It's extremely overwhelming when you first start doing it. So it takes intentional effort. And the last thing I'll say is develop thick skin, because as John 15:18 told us, if the world hates you, know that it hated me before it hated you. If you feel that the things Jeremy and I talked about tonight make sense, that they sound like they're morally unimpeachable, meaning to want white people to have nations of their own is no different than the Jewish people wanting to have Israel, and the Asian people wanting to carve out China for Chinese people and Japan for Japanese people. These things aren't in any way morally wrong. So I want you guys to become articulate on these subjects, and that only happens through education and through practice talking about them. So that's what we can do.
Let me push back on one, because the idea of going to Harvard Law or any law school to become a high level attorney, the way the bar is set up right now, and the way I went to Grand Canyon University for a while to get my master's in counseling. It's supposedly a Christian university, and it is, but just to keep their accreditation in their counseling department, they have a very woke curriculum. I was shocked. The things I was learning from their curriculum stood in complete contrast with their mission statement as a university, because they wanted to hold on to their accreditation. It was exhausting to me. And I just quit. I said I would do more damage as a life coach or as someone starting a program like Warrior Mind, Body, and Soul than wasting my time and money supporting this. So at the point right now, you basically have to go to an indoctrination center, a university or otherwise, to become in those circles that will allow you to be in the federal government or what have you. So I would not want to send my son to Harvard. I just wouldn't. So you hear where I'm coming from on that? Because you're saying let's detach from Hollywood, but yet you're also saying let's go become some high level person through a system that hates you.
Fair enough. Yeah. It's kind of a difference between the Ivy League schools versus just getting educated. I myself went to community college. I'm not the result of a very, very expensive education. I'm the result of a lot of hours of education. And so when I say get educated and become articulate, it's doing so with the consciousness of your teacher's bias. When they start preaching the CRT garbage and all this pro-abortion feminism garbage, hoping that you have parents who are instilling you with Christian morality, or that you yourself are engaged in the Christian lifestyle and you have the bullshit detector, the Holy Spirit that is inside you that says, actually, feminism is an inversion of the patriarchy. I know that's wrong. I'm not going to absorb that part of this education. And the same is true with promoting homosexuality and so on. So I wouldn't want our Christian followers to say, you know what, these satanic institutions are clearly satanic right now, so I'm just going to fully opt out of them. The problem is we still need accountants, and we still need innovators, and we still need software engineers. So somehow they have to become those things. And the institutions that provide those education right now are still the higher education system, whatever you call it. Now, it probably The Ivy League specifically is a problem because that is the feeder funnel for the government and for the C-suite of the corporations that from the top down tell us what to think. And so we want to infiltrate those because they're so powerful. But at the same time, when you go and join them, you can't become them. That's what I mean by infiltration. You go in there and you're in it, but you don't absorb their ideologies.
There's one other thing that I think of, because you're right. And if I'm giving the full story of my time at Grand Canyon, I quit doing it because I already had a job in the background where I was making good money. I didn't need to do it. But if it was my goal to become a professional Christian counselor and I had to go through that woke curriculum here, I got downgraded on a pay. I'm a good writer. I think a great writer, but my professor told me as much, but she said, I was getting all A's on every single thing that I wrote. Then I came up against the woke part of the curriculum. I was shocked by it and I was calling it out in my paper a bit, and I got like a C-. And I knew this was not about the quality of my work. This was because ideologically I was opposing what they had to say. I told the teacher the professor, I'm not going to change my ideology for this class or anything else. What I am going to do is I'm going to use the New York Times and other sources against themselves, against this curriculum. I'm going to cite everything. I had to work extra hard. I had to get extra creative. And I remember the last paper that I ever wrote for the class, I made an A+, but I went even harder against what we were being taught. But I said, here's why what I'm saying is true. And I used all these secular sources to prove my point. And I know I could have probably, it wasn't like they were going to be so biased against me I never could have graduated. I could have got my master's in counseling, but it was going to take that much more work on my end to do so. And I think that ultimately that would probably have served me well, going the extra mile to do those things. And I think a guy like yourself, you're working for a Fortune 100 company. You can make yourself so invaluable through the quality of work that you produce that they kind of like put your ideology on the back burner. And I'm saying for anyone in any career, to where like this guy, this gal is so valuable with what they bring, we would never think of getting rid of them. And then if they do, they do. But I think that that's the other way that we can infiltrate, is just go in knowing you're going to have to put forth the extra effort and go the extra mile just to make it through.
Yeah, we got to become remarkable people, remarkably talented, remarkably devout in our faith. You know, the settling for the least common denominator of just getting by and spending your time playing video games and consuming mass marketed material from Jewish people, that's what people have been doing for the last 60 years. And now our country is on its last legs. So it's like, we got to take the situation seriously. Yeah. And I mean, I deferred my actual education up until I think I was 26 when I finally went back to college, because I didn't want to do it. I attempted once when I was a teenager and ended up dropping out. But eventually I saw that I need to become a very competent man, largely because I had valued the concept of family and I want to be able to provide for them. But now I know that my professional competence is also tied to defending the Christian faith here and also my race. Like, being somebody who is highly competent in the professional world brings benefits to those causes as well. You know, Christendom needs people who are skilled in every single facet of life. Yeah. So whatever your professional sector is, become great at it and operate intelligently. This doesn't mean you go out on the first day of the job and start telling everybody about your missionary work and that. You know, don't go and intentionally get yourself fired just to be a martyr, but be able to compartmentalize.
Yeah.
And it's kind of using their institutions against them. I mean, if I can be a highly compensated individual on their payroll without changing my beliefs, then that can be something that helps me build up this platform. For example, the money that I have made in the Fortune 100 is what has financed me creating and growing this channel and having the time, the resource of time to put into it so I can go out and do this missionary and activist work. Say what you will about sleeping with the enemy and stuff, working for them. Well, they're the people who finance this entire thing. So it's a little bit, when I say infiltrate,
that's what they've done to us. Yeah, that they have infiltrated our country and our institutions, utilizing the power structures we had against us. That's what they've done for 100 years or more. So
yeah, exactly.
one thing you talked about, which so far you've given great examples of things we can do personally. And then a little bit there at the end about what we can do out in the world. But there was another thing you brought up to me off camera in a different conversation about how we vote, and not just voting, but holding a candidate's feet to the fire on, are you unashamedly a Christian, and what does that mean to you? And I like the way that you talk to me about that. Tell me more about that aspect of it. Like, say you're not going to run yourself, but we want to hold our leader accountable in our county, for instance.
Yeah, I don't think we should, as Christian voters, have any hesitation to say that I will only settle for Christian leadership. I'm not going to vote for somebody who is not willing to say that Jesus Christ is God. And we have to be very, very clear and explicit with the language in saying, it's not one nation under God. It's not, I believe in God. I believe in a higher power. That's all Freemasonry. That's, you can believe in anything you want and call it God and say that you're, oh yeah, we're part of the conservative fold. We're part of the American identity. Hard stop. The American identity was birthed by Christianity and European people coming together. It was not birthed by an ambiguous God, whoever that might be. It could be Allah, it could be Krishna and Vishnu.
The great architect.
Yeah, and whatever it is that these people believe about a higher power that is something other than Jesus Christ being that higher power, I want no participation in that. And our leadership have to rebuke any of the other options. They have to say that I am a Christian and that's the values that I am going to defend. And that shouldn't be very difficult for alleged conservative people to do.
Shouldn't be.
But what you'll continually find, and this is amongst the GOP, the Republicans who claim to be conservative, they'll say they believe in God, and that's where they'll stop. They'll say, you know, I believe in one nation under God. I believe that all men are created equal in the image of God. And that's a loose reference to what's in the Bible, so it makes Christians feel better. That's all good and great. But when you're surveying the interviews and the other kind of public content that these politicians put out, take diligent note. Do they ever actually talk about Jesus Christ? Because do you know who will not talk about Jesus Christ in a favorable way? Jeremy, would you like to answer that question?
Well, I think you're going to say the Jewish people.
Exactly. I mean, even agnostic atheist people, even our Abrahamic brothers over there in the Muslim world, will often acknowledge that Christianity is still a net good in the world. And that Christian neighbors, if you have to take a vote among what kind of neighbors do you want living next door to you, people will typically say having Christians in the neighborhood is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Yeah. And so we have to be explicit about the religious faith of our leaders and call them to the floor and say, is Jesus Christ our Lord and Savior? If they say anything other than yes, then that's an alarm bell.
Yeah, and I think it's an easy thing to do. I mean, and it takes some boldness. It's strange that it takes boldness at this time, but it's a good litmus test for those that are attending the town hall. If you go to a town hall, you get a chance to raise your hand, walk up to the podium or the microphone and ask that question of the person trying to get elected of do you believe in Jesus Christ? And even how is that going to affect your policy on this issue? So that you don't have the mayor who says, well, I went up and met with the rabbi in Nashville and they told me this. That right there should have been a telltale sign for everyone. This guy is reaching out to another religion to inform his views on wokeism. And none of the Christians were aware enough to know he probably went to the worst religion possible to go to when it comes to wokeism. So it was just this complete abortion of facts and truth in that moment.
Yeah, I like what you did there. It's one of their favorite topics.
Yeah. All right. Last thing. We should have brought this up first. Everybody that's watching right now, do not turn this off. I thought this was so powerful when you anecdotally, kind of like off the radar told me this. And I was like, wait, what? So we've talked a lot about the Jewish faith, Jewish ethnicity even. And, you yourself have had to make major sacrifices like anyone that speaks out on this issue. I've talked about it a little bit of myself, but you told me, you said, Jeremy, my own family has kind of turned away from me. Talk a little bit about that, because I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I find it incredibly powerful.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder, because it's something that I'm certainly not ashamed of, or it's not something that I hide. I just kind of, I don't know. I don't want to bring it up every single episode, basically. I do my own show, obviously, for those who don't know. So I know I've talked about it on air, so it's not a secret, but I actually have Jewish family, which might sound like, whoa, wait a minute. You just went on for 2 hours about the Jews and whatnot and all this. I am half ethnically Jewish. My mom was Jewish. So if I wanted to claim my Jewish ancestry and say that that's part of my identity, part of my values, part of my priorities, I would actually have an ethnic claim to do so. However, I fully reject any involvement whatsoever in any aspect of Jewish culture. That's loyalty to the nation of Israel, that's Judaism, the religion, or the ethnic practices of the Jewish people. And I do that because I am a Christian, and because when I simply objectively look around the world at the ethnic civilizations, the ethno-states, I can't say that the Jewish nation of Israel is a more attractive nation than any of the European nations. And I can't say that any of the Arab world are more attractive than the European nations, and especially not the African nations, and nor the Asian nations, or nor the South American or the Indian or India. So it's not a matter of like explicitly having a problem or a hatred or some kind of vitriol towards this ethnic or religious group of people. It's about logical deduction. I read the Bible. It resonated with me. I then prayed to Jesus Christ. I received a miracle immediately afterward. I, over time, converted very devoutly to Christianity. So that's where my religious feelings come from. But my feelings around ethnicity, and this is an important thing to talk about because I'm a guy who just went on for 2 hours about how important it is to protect the white majority in America. Well, this is coming from somebody who the other half of my family is Swedish. So I do, by the way, still have fair claim to European ancestry. That's where the eyes and all this stuff come from. But that's how I can actually speak on this objectively, stepping back and saying, I understand that I'm even talking about my own family. I'm rejecting my own family members' religious beliefs and their ethnic priorities when they perhaps aren't active in the Jewish religion, but still claim Jewish heritage. When they talk about the Holocaust as being part of their past, that's what they're referring to. So you don't have to be a religious Jew to be in this conversation about Jews. My personal experience has been, as a Christian who is now speaking up for white advocacy, has been bitter, painful, very painful sacrifices to do this work. And I want to warn anybody who is in the same situation. Maybe you're not, part Jewish by DNA, but what I mean by the situation is you see that these topics are critical to the future of our nation, to the future of Christendom in the West. You want to be a part of this and you want to stand up to defend it. You have to know that there are going to be sacrifices, and perhaps even excluding actual death, the worst possible sacrifices one can go through. And I'm talking about losing family members. I'm talking about your professional career that you've worked decades to build, being attacked by complete strangers with false allegations. These are the things that may happen to you when you stand up and do this work. And so one of the things that I would ask when I do my show, I have a 2-minute intro clip that rolls on repeat before I start the show. And it's a homily delivered by a Catholic pastor named Father Mark Goring. And he closes it by saying, at this point in time, we have to be praying for the saints and the prophets of our day, this generation we're living in today. We have to pray for their protection, because the people who go out there and do this work, who are the saints and the evangelists of today, are under attack by their own family members and by the entire world, the worldly, secular world. Every single day of their life, they're under attack, and they're taking major sacrifices to advance this work. So I solicit your prayers for myself and for everybody else involved in this activist work, in this missionary work, because we need it. I mean, when I do my show, I ask all of my viewers, I need you guys to be praying for every single one of the saints and prophets being lifted up in our time right now for the resources they need. This includes Jeremy. He's trying to make this his full-time thing, so he doesn't have to go and be beholden to the normie corporate world like I am, unfortunately. So prayer helps with that. Prayer helps. Ask God for providence and protection for all of the people out doing this work right now, and support them in any way that you can. So that's my personal testimony. There are immense sacrifices that I've paid, but I've done so with full confidence, knowing what the Bible tells me would happen to people who do this. I actually saw a meme today that I reshared on Instagram. Quick reminder, 11 out of the 12 disciples, what was their reward for following Jesus Christ? Yeah. Brutal execution, beheaded, thrown off of cliffs, put on a rack and stretch, crucified upside down. I'm not saying I want your life to be miserable and painful, and it doesn't have to be that way, but it is a realistic expectation to set for people. Because the thing is when they hear our honest message and see that it's not coming from a place of hatred, it is hard to stand by and watch it continue to happen. And so you feel compelled to get into the movement, but do so carefully. Do the education first. Know the dates. Know the names. Know the demographic data. Study the Bible religiously. Not to use a pun there, but seriously, you got to be deeply familiar with it. So that's my situation.
Well, thank you. I think it adds a lot of gravitas and foundational. It's inarguable in a way, because when you say that you are half Jewish, because now people can't claim that, well, you just got a Jewish bone stuck in your throat. You just hate the Jewish people. It's like, no, this is your family. It's your mom, right? I mean, you don't want these things to be true, but they kind of are. And if we don't talk about it, our nation is going to continually spiral into this slow death. And I think if we do have a third show, we could probably dig a bit more into this idea of Christian and white and why you feel, again, I'm just kind of learning about these issues, that those two things are connected in a big way. Cause my thought still goes to, and I'll give you the final word on this. My final thought kind of goes to, well, why can't we just evangelize these people, whether they be Black, Jewish, Asian, like whatever they are. And I do think we should. I think you would agree with that. But rather than try to just get it back into this major white majority, because that might be too hard at this point. I think that's a question enough. What do you have to say about that?
I've actually put deep thought into this subject, and to the point where I'm actually drawing maps and creating prototypes of how a future America 50 years from now could look, that answers all of these questions in a way where nobody is violently hurt, nobody is subjected to cruelty in any form or fashion. What I foresee having to happen is some kind of rearrangement of America based on the principle of freedom of association, which if you're familiar with Jared Taylor, he talks about this subject where it's not immoral for one to want to surround themselves with people who share their own cultural values or religious values. And so what we need to do in America is provide room for people to essentially opt in to the type of religious culture they live amongst and the ethnic culture they live amongst. So if you can imagine America that has perhaps separate spaces for people who love diversity and who want to live amongst all the races of the world, by all means, I want people who want that to be able to experience that. But at the same time, we can't continue to call people who don't want that immoral. We can't say that they are somehow hurting other people just by appreciating their own race. And by the way, that double standard that's there, it only applies to white people, right? We're going to say it over and over again. But I do believe that there is a way to create an America where we provide the space for everybody that says, this section over here, if you value diversity, then we've carved out that space for you. And if you're a white person who says part of the construction of America, down to the laws that we wrote for hundreds of years, were written to explicitly keep America a majority white country. We're not asking for anything that isn't on the historical record going back 60 years before that Hart-Celler Immigration Act. So we have a morally unimpeachable argument to say that we simply want our country to be what it historically has been. And it's not an ask that the other ethnicities don't demand elsewhere in the world. And so this is the fundamental, hard thing to reconcile. People say, okay, I get that, but doesn't that somehow violate Christianity? I would ask you how. How does a European saying that the nation I live in, with a European history built by European people wanting to remain that way, where does that violate Christianity any more than Chinese people wanting to be 92% Chinese in their country, or Israel wanting to remain primarily Jewish, so much so that they write it into their laws that say we can't accept immigration above a certain point because it would change the majority status of our country. Mm-hmm. So unless you're willing to condemn the rest of the whole world and call the rest of the whole world antichrists, then you can't come to me and tell me that my desires are somehow anti-Christian.
Yeah, no, that's a great word. That sounds like fodder for a whole another show. I would love for you to take your maps you're drawing. That'd be controversial right there. But I'd like to have you on for a third show so we can talk about some of that. I'd love to pull up a map or two, and because I think that'd be a fun topic to get into. And also, I'm still, as you know, in the middle of exploring that whole topic, and I don't know exactly where I'm going to land on it, but I'm absolutely open to it, and I absolutely see the double standard that's in play. Josh, we've been going on for what? 2 hours, 6 minutes. I think it's time to wrap it up and enjoy a Sunday night, brother.
Yeah, I haven't even looked at the clock once, and I think that's a sign of a good conversation.
I do too, man. I really appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate the hard work, the sacrifices you've made, and the research it's taken to be able to eloquently talk about a very difficult topic. So thank you for doing that.
Thanks for having the courage to put me on and give me a voice, my friend. You got a great following both here on Rumble and on Instagram. So I would ask you guys to try to find me on both platforms. I'm trying to grow mine as well. And hopefully, I think we only need, and this number might sound big, but it's actually not, in a country of 330 million people, I think we need somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000 people who understand these two topics, that there is a definable identity to America, and that identity is why we succeeded. And it's not immoral to ask us to retain that identity being Christian and majority European people.
Wow.
So
even that number of 50 to 100,000 that know that, I can't wait to ask that in the third interview. Dude, we're going to do it again. Thanks, Josh, for coming on, and I'll see you again soon, brother. And thank all of you for watching Jay Slay Made in the USA. I plan to put out 3 to 4 shows a week going forward, and I'm excited to have you here. We'll talk soon.
Bye, guys.